there's a dress code out for all Pakistani universities, which says that teachers and students, girl students, cannot wear jeans. Why? Well, because it's not consistent with our moral values and morality. Again, I come back to this. It's all about the female body.
Do you feel that because of all those developments, that might have created a specific philosophical structure for Pakistanis? Now, when I say philosophical, the first idea that comes to my own mind is religious, right? Religious thought, religious structure. But I suppose the inconsistency that I see is what you mentioned yourself, right? Between the 9th and the 13th century, when all these Muslim scientists were doing these wonderful things, but they were doing it in Baghdad. They were doing it in a very different region. How do you feel that the philosophical, we'll get into the structural impediments, I guess, right now as soon as well, but how do you feel the philosophical understanding is shaped in Pakistan towards science? I actually do want to give an example as well. I'm not sure if you remember, but around last year, the government had banned PUBG, right, which is a video game. And I wrote an article, and I was trying to look at it through two lenses, right? I looked at it from an economic lens and an addiction lens, because that's what the government referenced. They said that it's too addictive for the kids. And I analyzed it through both of these lenses. It's economically bad because you're creating a bad incentive for these companies who might want to invest, because you just ban it without any transparent process behind it. And then, in terms of addiction, well, it's a manifestation of a specific kind of misery. And if you're going to ban this, then do you ban all kinds of video games? Do you ban all kinds of things? And then the government recently banned Tinder, right? Tinder and Bumble, and I'm not sure.
Banned what?
Tinder. Tinder is a dating app. All right, so it's a dating app and very popular around the world. But they banned it in Pakistan, and they cited moral reasons. They said that it's morally incompatible with the Pakistani society, and it's very interesting, right? Because I want to say that even technology like Tinder, right? You can say that it's a product of science, right? You can say that these creations that the population might see incompatible with their culture, they're created out of science, right? Do you feel that philosophical understanding of science exists in Pakistan? And if so, what is that philosophical perspective towards science? Is it always looking at it through the lens of, hey, is this compatible with my culture or not? And so on.
Yeah, well, the whole idea of where right and wrong derive from is over here, and I guess in most Muslim countries, derive from the Quran. And the more seriously one takes that, the more socially conservative one becomes. So Afghanistan, of course, is now a recent development. And you see that the first thing that the Taliban did upon coming to power was to say that girls can't study in co-ed schools. Universities have to be separate, that no male teacher may teach a female student, that women will have to be veiled. Now, whether it's going to be full burqa or what, because right now they're playing to the external world. But you see that imperative of morality. Now, morality is construed in conservative societies like Afghanistan, like Pakistan, in sexual terms. So a girl of good morals doesn't want to ever think of boys. If she's a good girl, She'll never even try to imagine what a good boy is, or what a male looks like or can do or whatever. She just has to keep her head down. She has to, she's not responsible for earning the bread for a family. She has to essentially be a good mother. So a good child and then a good mother, raise a lot of kids and so forth, and be obedient to her husband and so forth. So morality, most of morality, I should say, is construed in these terms. Now this obviously has implications. Take our universities. Our universities are about as inspiring intellectually as a cowshed. Where cows are banded together. There's no discussion. There's no intellectual curiosity. The teachers don't teach. So I just had a complaint from somebody who's high up in administration in a big university here in Islamabad. And she says that students are saying that a certain teacher during the entire semester took only 5 lectures out of something like 40. And then that teacher, that professor, gave 3 quizzes when 5 are required, and then gave 100% marks to all of them, well, 190%, without even grading. And that's a criminal act to my mind. That professor is making a huge amount of money. Now, the reason that professor won't get thrown out of the university is because they're all doing that. And yeah, maybe the promotion might be held up by a few months or so, but this is something that's rampant, that's across the board. Corruption is something that we've learned to live with, but sexual freedom is something that we can't. So in fact, we had Imran Khan saying that if there's a rape, it's the woman who's responsible because she enticed that rapist. He said this, and he wasn't apologetic about it. Then he had to lie his way through when the BBC confronted him and so forth. But look, Imran Khan thinks exactly as the average Pakistani male. The average Pakistani male thinks that it's the woman who is responsible. And the average Pakistani male thinks that morality is sexual morality. Now, that means that every other kind of morality gets through, immorality gets through. Here in Islamabad, judges assign themselves free plots of land. It's incredible. And these are Supreme Court justices as well. So look, there is a philosophical problem. The fact is that today, the highest level of corruption gets through, but even minor misdemeanors in terms of your dress. Now there's a dress code out for all Pakistani universities, which says that teachers and students, girl students, cannot wear jeans. Why? Well, because it's not consistent with our moral values and morality. Again, I come back to this. It's all about the female body.
Do you feel that the in terms of education, do you feel that it's the negative effects of this moral policing? Do you feel that the moral policing is specifically directed towards education, or do you feel it's a spillover effect because it's directed towards towards sexuality, towards female members of society? Do you feel that is it a spillover effect, or is it directly targeting education?
I don't think it's specifically about education, but education is, of course, where minds are made, and kids are vulnerable. And so educational institutions in particular are then very closely scrutinized. Now, of course, in madrasas, there's also a problem. The amount of sexual abuse that kids get over there, and mullahs, young and old, man, the time that they have with the kids out there, it's absolutely disgusting. And so many of them have been caught. And yet nobody calls for them to be stoned to death. Although in Islam it is written that the punishment for improper sexual activity is punishable by stoning to death. That does happen in, or rather I should say, that did happen in Afghanistan. And if Pakistan becomes Afghanistan, it might happen over here as well. But these are those wretched, backward, infinitely degraded positions that one day we might fall back into.
Professor, do you feel that there's something inevitable about Pakistan's educational state if we do continue to follow the construed, as you mentioned, the construed religious conservatisms that we do? Do you feel that if, even if we implemented the exact same philosophical criterias in, let's say, a random country, you feel that the results would be exactly the same? Or do you feel there's something particular about Pakistan that we need to address that can't necessarily be linked to the religious conservatism? Because when we think of, say, I guess what I'm trying to say is, when we think of Muslim countries, say, right, my mind goes to, Indonesia is usually, highlighted as a prime example, right? Like, oh, look, it's a Muslim country, but yet you see economic development, you see women and men studying, you see them both pursuing education in the way they do. And then you see Muslims in Europe, in the US, and just across the Western world, where they're also, they find themselves, religiously devoted, but also very much doing things that a religiously conservative society like Afghanistan, like Pakistan, might disagree with, right? They go to universities, they wear jeans, they wear the hijab, they wear jeans, they study the things that a lot of these girls in these religious conservative societies don't do. So where do you think the inconsistency really lies in terms of the philosophy? Because the philosophy that they seem to be following seems to be, it's Islam. So where is the inconsistency necessarily that leads to different results in Pakistan and then different results in, let's say, a woman studying in Europe?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. If you look at Muslims in Europe, they're in contact with the modern culture. They have therefore been influenced by it. If you look at Indonesia, Indonesia was the history of Indonesia, the history of Islam in Indonesia is very different from the history of Islam on the subcontinent. And by the way, I shouldn't say that the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent, is all one. I would say that if you look at Bengalis, the Bengali Muslim culture, it is quite accepting of women working, of women being unveiled, showing their hair, the full length of their hair. They used to wear saris, probably still do. And by and large, earlier on, at least, you couldn't distinguish between a Bengali Muslim woman and a Bengali Hindu woman. If one looks at Sindh or Balochistan, well, in terms of the women, yeah, there was a lot of conservatism. You could distinguish between a Hindu woman in Sindh and a Hindu woman and a Muslim woman in Sindh. The Muslim women would be much more covered up, they would be much more restricted, and so forth. But look, there were Muslims on this subcontinent, and they were very different in terms of their attitudes. Or if you look at women in South India, Muslim women in South India, nobody goes for the burqa there. Very few of them, relatively speaking, in states like Kerala, for example. So the point is that culture has a lot to do with the expression of a religion. Now, let me say, earlier on we were talking about science and learning and religion. Okay, now if you look at Iran, I haven't gone to Iran recently, but I went in what were the bad days when the mullahs were supposed to be firmly in power. They still are, but that's when they were consolidating their power. They had consolidated. And yet, when I went there for a mathematical physics conference, that conference didn't begin with a recitation of the Quran. It went straight to the subject. When I looked at books that are taught in Iranian schools, I asked my Iranian friends, what the heck are you doing teaching evolution? Don't you know that is forbidden in Islam? They said, who told you that? Okay, I said, look, it's banned across much of the Muslim world. Well, it turned out that Iranian mullahs, and going as high up as Ayatollah Khomeini, turned out that they didn't think that Darwinian evolution was contradictory with Islam. So you see, the Iranians come from a higher culture than Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Bangladesh, for that matter, also. And this makes Iran really such a formidable enemy for the West. So look, it's a tiny country compared to Pakistan, and yet America is so scared of Iran because Iran has the strength, the scientific, intellectual strength, and it didn't allow religion to crush science the way religion has crushed science here in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, by the way, is improving. It's now realized that it can't, they can't have Bedouin values and yet hope for the skies.